Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Steel City Rings podcast. I'm Leanne Lohman. I'm joined today by Zach Franciscus and Bob Quinn. How are you guys doing today?
Wonderful.
Good. Want to
We're
know?
moving on from Victory Monday to pre-game Friday.
The whole week feels amazing when you win on Sunday. The whole week feels like you're like on cloud nine. It's like being in love when you're 16. It feels so good. And the Steelers did win. They managed to beat the Atlanta Falcons and kind of Arthur Smith's going home revenge game 18-10. We'll get into a little bit about the upcoming week with the Denver Broncos, but we have just a few news items. The ongoing injury to Russell Wilson is something that's come up. We'll talk about it more a little bit later when we talk about the Russell versus Justin Fields debate for this upcoming game against the Denver Broncos. Russell said today after practice that he feels like he's getting better. It's slowly improving. He's obviously frustrated, especially with the thought of not playing against his old team, which is something he really wants to do. And he feels like he's slowly improving, but it sounds like he's not there yet. Roman Wilson has been working out. He said after practice yesterday that he wants to play, but I guess you have to take that with a grain of salt because everybody says they want to play. Isaac Seumalo was there today. While he is not going to be playing this coming weekend, he was definitely looking better. Darius Rush, Larry Ogunjobi, those are other guys that were kind of dealing with injuries. We'll wait and kind of see where they stand. And Dan Moore with his ankle. So at practice yesterday, they said they had Troy Fatanu and Broderick Jones finally lined up in the positions where God meant them to be. And so that's exciting to hear. That's going to put a smile on Bob's face. And then the other piece of news we have is that the Steelers chose to bring back Terrell Edmunds, which you don't really know right now where they plan to use him. Edmunds has said he's so grateful to be back that he'll do anything they want him to do, special teams, subbing in, whatever it is. But he is back, which provides some pretty outstanding depth to that area of the field. So let's dive into it and talk first about Russell versus Justin. Obviously, it sounds like Justin's going to get the start this weekend, but that, of course, isn't really set in stone yet. What do you two think?
Well, I think the one thing we have to look at is Russell Wilson. I think last week was expecting that I can wait all the way up until before game time because I'm Hall of Fame Russell Wilson and I've got the cachet to just show up and say I can play like, frankly, Ben Roethlisberger could have done. And he had a lot of equity built up with Mike Tomlin. And let's face it, what Mike Tomlin's choices usually were Mason Rudolph, Landry Jones, Charlie Batch. No offense to those guys, but if Ben could go, Ben was going to go. So I think Wilson maybe expected that a little bit, but now this week he's kind of, I think someone has gotten to him and said, "Hey," and Chris Muller brought up this point on the PM show with Filipponi and Muller. I think somebody has gotten to Russ and said, "Hey, you need to understand something. If you go out there less than 100% and pull a like Baker Mayfield did, and look what that got Cleveland, Deshaun Watson. Thanks, Baker.
Yeah.
But if you go out and put some bad tape on the out there and all of a sudden they got to bring Justin Fields back in, you're going to look really, really bad, and your starting quarterback career is over."
Yeah.
And
or take this from a calf to an Achilles, which everybody keeps talking about is like one of the big possibilities when you're 35 years old, you know what I mean? A little bit older quarterback, that injury very quickly transitions into an Achilles. And Kirk Cousins managed to come back from that, but we all saw he didn't look 100% last weekend. So no. I think that would certainly be like the end for Russell. I can't imagine you're not even with the team that's married to you. You haven't put anything good on tape, and now your Achilles goes out.
Yeah, and today I know Russell was saying that, I got to be smart. And it seemed like what he was saying was more in line with where the team was. And a lot of people are like, well, it seems like Russell's accepting it. I kind of see it differently because the Russell Wilson PR machine is a monster unlike anything else in the NFL. And I think someone from his team said, listen, people saw you pouting. People saw you upset. People noticed there after that game you weren't as rah as you've been. So let's spin this. Let's fix this. So he is back on whatever is good for the team. Rah again. And I think right now, whatever Russell's feeling personally, that's what this team needs. So if he really wants to be a team player like he was showing in preseason and not Kenny Pickett, this is where you show it. And Justin Fields seemed very, very confident when I saw it. He was just like, this is my job to go out and look good. And when I look good and help us win, I feel good. The other players were talking about it was good to have a full week of Justin Fields and knowing who they were going to have, because it just like the changing with the offensive line, it can't be easy for an offense to have to keep two quarterbacks in their head leading up to it. But Arthur Smith, I'm just gonna the whole season I'm gonna harp on the differences between Arthur Smith and Matt Canada, and Matt Canada wouldn't have known what to do with any of the quarterbacks he had, let alone if he had the game plan for two coming up with it. So what we would have seen is either Justin Fields running a Russell Wilson offense or the other way around because he didn't know which way to plan. So overall, I think our team came out looking good. Just Russell Wilson has to continue to be on the team's, say what.
And just in fairness to Russell Wilson, these reports of him pouting and being upset, they were after the fact. Kaboli saying in the locker room, he didn't display any of that on the field. So could it have been fake that he was faking his enthusiasm on the sideline? Yeah, but
don't we all do that? Isn't that real life? I mean, how often in your life do you have to fake enthusiasm at work when you don't feel it? I mean, come on. I think that's a normal part of like being human. I will say that, when I did a piece on Kaboli saying that he was upset, I got a lot of pushback from fans talking about, oh, the stop, this is clickbait, which it's not if I didn't say it. And they said that, well, he was, what you just said, we saw him on the sidelines, pumping his guys up, pumping up the fans, you know what I mean? Rah, rah, rah. And then, you go into the locker room and they kind of said because he did that, then he couldn't have done this. But some other people said, well, this makes me wonder if all of this rah, rah, rah stuff is fake, like that he's been doing. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe all those old rumors we used to hear about him were true. And then now he's, so he's only doing that when he's in the public eye, for optics, for the camera. I think that's a little bit of an unfair story to tell with one situation, but.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say optics either. I mean, let's face it. He's on the sideline. He's not playing. A guy on the sideline, you do one of two things to help the team. You're either there talking to guys saying, hey, great job. Let's keep it up. I'm engaged in the game. Or you stand there like a lot of times Ben or we've seen TJ do this when they're in street clothes and they just kind of sit there with the earphone in and they don't do or say much of anything. So I'm okay with either way. I'm okay with it. And if it's fake, okay, then I'd rather see that than see you sitting there with a towel over your head pouting, or worse yet, not standing on the sidelines supporting your.
I'm really okay if he was upset after the game. Like, what's that? Mike Tomlin always says, I'd rather say whoa than sick 'em. Do you know what I mean? So if you feel that passionate and you're that frustrated and upset, I think that's a good thing. You're going to do whatever you need to do to heal to hopefully get back.
And I don't know if I would call it fake. There's a word I use because I worked in retail for 15 years, and you have a retail face. And it's not fake. It's what you need to get through that moment. And it's what people around you might need. Like when I was a manager, if I was having a bad day, sometimes I had to look happy. So my other people, fake and retail are two different things. So I don't know. It could be fake. But right now, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say this was a retail choice. This was, I know what face is necessary. And none of us have worked with thousands of people watching us, with cameras on us all the time. I worked at a Starbucks once that was a 360 view of people, and I felt like I was in a little cage in a zoo. I can't imagine what NFL players feel like. Every reaction, everything is there. So
wait a minute. Wait a minute. Are you saying there's not thousands of people watching this podcast?
If there are, we need to get a lot more comments. I'm just saying, we've got a lot of quiet people.
You're doing a terrible job subscribing.
But yeah, let's face it. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. I've heard some suggestions now that we might not see Wilson until October. So Fields gets a 4-week audition. If that's true, I love the idea of it because I just like I said last week, I don't think he'll give it back. I thought last week was pretty good, but with a lot of room to improve. But if he continues, hey, I just managed the game, the touchdowns will come. But frankly, if you tell me all season long we're going to win games by 8 points with Boz kicking 6 field goals. Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
agree. I don't know how you ever give it back to him though. Like, I'll be honest. I mean, unless he tanks, you know what I mean? He gets worse. We're losing games. I feel like if he plays for 4 weeks and he's winning, I don't know how you take the game from him. Do you know what I mean? This isn't a clear backup situation like if Mason had come in for Ben and won 3 or 4 games in a row. Do you know what I mean? That game was that spot was always going to be Ben's to have back. Do you know what I mean? No matter how you sliced it, Mason was never at Ben's caliber or whatever. So with this situation where neither one of them have really played for the Steelers, and Russ has kind of gone downhill over the past couple of years, and Justin is ascending, at some point, how do you really know, with never having seen them in our organization, where they both are? So I get why it, like, in theory, makes sense to want to see like what Russ can do under center. But by that same token, what does it do to Justin's confidence if you pull him and bench him when he's in the middle of winning you games?
Well, I thought Mike Florio made a really good point on this. He was kind of piggybacking off of something Mike Greenberg put out on ESPN. This is actually a best case scenario for the Steelers, because it's not that you pulled Justin Fields off the field because let's say he just plateaus and we've kind of seen, okay, this is what the performance is going to be. I'm going to throw for 150 yards. I'm going to run for 50. We're going to win, kind of going away because of the defense. I'm not setting the world on fire, but I'm not losing any games. Then it becomes the scenario of, okay, well, Russell Wilson is now healthy and Justin Fields hasn't done enough to where he's locked the job away. You can bring Russell Wilson back on the field because, well, now he's healthy. So we're gonna put Justin Fields back in the backup role because he was our starter. He just got hurt. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic to throw into it.
And it's kind of been the off season of narratives in Pittsburgh, because the media loves controversies. I don't care what anyone in the media says; they are hoping for a quarterback controvery here because goodness, the stories it would make.
Oh, they made
a tweet.
They made one when there wasn't even supposed to be one.
So we have gone since right before training camp. A narrative has come out that has had us questioning the conditioning staff, the coaching staff, the Russell Wilson, all of that. And a tweet came out, and it's making me wonder where the narratives are, what is actually happening, all that. Because Brian Vatko, just a couple days ago, through this, I mean, this is the first I've heard of. We were talking about it in prep. We were looking. I haven't seen anyone else throw this out that it was not a blocking sled. Everyone, I know Leanne was saying Filipponi. And have you guys seen anything of this sort where the narrative is just straight out debunked?
Every time one of them has been on a show, Fittipaldo, Caboli, every time they're on a show, Joe Starkey asks, every time somebody comes on his show, why would you let this guy hit the blocking sled? I've heard him bring it up a bunch of times, including, just either yesterday or the day before. I can't remember which day it was. And even then it was still this talk about, well, we don't really know, this new conditioning staff, they wanted to see what they could do. And so to hear Batko clearly denounce that is wild.
Well, the only question I have for Batko is, where were you a month ago when everybody was up in arms about this?
Yeah.
I mean, now you throw it out that it wasn't the blocking sled. And I know, Leanne, you said you heard some information where this injury might have predated the blocking. Blocking sled might have aggravated it, but you have some info that the injury might have happened a long time ago.
Yeah, yesterday on Believe in Steelers, Mark Bergen hosts that show. He usually has Ike Taylor on. But this week he had on the guy from Believe in Denver. And I wanted to say his last name was Chiotti, Chiotti. I meant to write it down. And he talked a lot about what went wrong with Russell Wilson in Denver and kind of that relationship and how it fell apart. And one of the things he said, almost like in passing, he was like, and, this calf injury he's got, that had been going on for about, 3 years. And he's like, so that was an issue, that was impacting his performance. And I went, wait, what? Like, what? 3 years? I'm like, that just happened with the blocking sled, right at the start of training camp. How has that been going on for 3 years? So Bergen didn't ask for clarification, but it made me wonder, was like this an issue we already had that then he re-aggravated with this blocking sled or whatever it was? Or was this an issue he was kind of downplaying or minimizing and then came in and hoped he would be 100% by the time the season started, and he wasn't, and they had to say something happened? I don't know why you would ever pick blocking sled, but
yeah. Well, I just interject something, and I'm sure Zach has something to say about this. But to me, it almost makes the conditioning staff look stupid, because if it's true this was a pre-existing condition,
right,
then why are you even having him take the test at all?
Right. And how could it not be known? So let me say that too. Like, the players have to go through physicals. You know what I mean? Teams share information. So, I mean, I certainly don't think the Denver Broncos would have hid, or, you know what I mean? It would have been a matter of all of his records from the medical staff. So if this was a pre-existing condition, the Steelers certainly knew about it. And you're right. It doesn't make any sense why you would throw him into that. He would continue trying to rehab. Like, I'm sure Kirk Cousins' preseason workout and training camp workout look different than it has in previous years, because while he's healed from this Achilles, he's still, rehabbing it. He's not 100%. So I'm sure that looked different for him. They didn't just throw him out there on a blocking sled.
Yeah. And no one comes out looking good in this. This is a lose-lose situation. The best thing that could happen right now is for Brian Bacco to be wrong, because that's the best thing that could happen. Because if he's right, number one, from the tweet, I'll bring it up really quick again for anyone who didn't see it. It sounds like he's known this for a bit, because it keeps coming up. Like he's been watching people comment on this for a bit, and to himself and the computer apparently has been saying, "Nah, that's not." Why now? So it's the narrative. It's an offseason of narratives, and personally, I hate Steeler narratives. Writing about them is fun and all that, but as a fan, I love quiet off seasons. I love when nothing happens, and I don't like that things are going. This is the best case scenario, like you said, Leanne. We always said before, if Justin Fields starts, this is Justin Fields is starting, and it's not a worst case scenario. So why is Baco throwing stuff into it? It's frustrating on all the levels, because someone is going to end up looking bad on this.
If we end up with Russell as our backup quarterback, though, that's not the worst thing that I could have imagined coming into the 2024 season. So
that's another thing.
Able to keep playing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's another thing Florio said yesterday. He's like, Russell kind of painted himself into the corner, and he says, "Don't think for 1 minute this didn't enter the Steelers' mind."
Oh yeah,
I get a veteran backup the quality of Russell Wilson for the league minimum. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, because of course I said this to somebody else. You're of course going to tell them you're going to start, because people have to remember that when they signed Russell Wilson, they could have had Justin Fields and they didn't choose him. He was out there, he was available, you know what I mean? And so their first choice was Russell Wilson over Justin Fields for whatever reason that they felt. And then when Kenny Pickett demanded a trade, then they were like, oh, okay, well, now we know Justin Fields is available too. We can get him for next to nothing. So we'll go ahead and just take him too. So I think it made sense in the beginning. You signed Russell first. Russell's won a Super Bowl. He's in 9 Pro Bowls. All of these things, it made sense to have him be named as your starter, this pole position. But, I said it back when that first came up that, pole position is not a guarantee. You can still lose the race from pole position. And I always believe that Mike Tomlin is very mindful with the words he chooses. Do you know what I mean? He never said he's our guaranteed starter. He just kept saying pole position. And to me, that carried a different connotation.
Don't you think he wish he hadn't said, because let's be honest, he said that knowing that, or thinking that Russell Wilson was going to compete with Kenny Pickett.
Yeah.
So he knew how that competition was going to turn out.
Right.
So, but he didn't know that a day later, that all of a sudden we're going to have Justin Fields sitting there, a guy who Tomlin has loved since his college pro day. I don't you think he regrets it?
Doesn't really care. Like, a part of me just thinks he doesn't really care. Like, he's going to do whatever he's going to do anyways. Do you know what I mean? Who cares what the media thinks? He never has. Do you know what I mean? So there's a part of me that thinks that's not even factoring into his decisions.
Well, wait a minute though. I don't buy the narrative. He doesn't care what the media thinks. I don't think he cares what the Pittsburgh media thinks. He's very invested in what Rich Eisen and Jake Glazer, those guys think.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, he has a different level of respect for those two for some reason. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. I mentioned it briefly in the news that our two tackles are now in the spots where God ordained them to be, or the gods or the universe or fate or whatever you believe in have ordained them to be. And Dan Moore is out with this ankle injury. So is this like the best case scenario for Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones, this ankle injury, which is allowing them to be where they're supposed to be so that they can give this a go? Because I don't know, would have it ever happened on its own?
Well, yesterday I felt very good about it. I'm still hoping, and sounds terrible to say about it, but I'm hoping that Dan Moore doesn't play. That's what we need. And unfortunately, today he got a little closer to coming back. I don't like saying I hope a player's injured, but he's already injured. So just take your time, Dan.
Right. Heal. Rest.
Yeah.
I'll go a little further. Chris Hoke said that Dan Moore is going to play.
I heard that too.
Sunday, and he inferred that he was practicing today, back at the left tackle spot because that's all he can play.
Right.
I'm telling this was a huge gift, like the Russell Wilson gift, that they just could have chalked it up to injury, but they let Dan Moore. It's bad enough how he plays on the field. They somehow let Dan Moore get the narrative out there that I'm fine. I'll be ready for Sunday. Even if he is ready for Sunday, he shouldn't be out there. And why would you come out and say it? I mean, at least, what do you want to make sure Denver knows that, hey, don't worry, the worst tackle in football is going to be out there. I know he got a good grade week 1, but I'm sorry, I don't know what they were watching.
Everybody says it. How much does that matter? I mean, Roman Wilson kind of said it. Do you know what I mean? People always say they're going to be ready to play. Russell Wilson said it before last week that he would play. Do you know what I mean? I think players always say that. It doesn't carry that much weight.
It does with Dan Moore, apparently.
Because maybe in his mind, but I mean, I don't know.
And against the Falcons, it's ignore the grade, ignore the score, because from what I saw, Dan Moore benefited from when the rest of the line played really well. When the pocket was there and it was good, it was not because of Dan Moore. It was because everyone else did their job and Dan Moore didn't have to do too much. You shouldn't be impressed when a tackle does what they're supposed to do. And Dan Moore, the best plays he had were what he was supposed to do, and the worst plays he was pushed backwards like he didn't even have legs. It was like, I can see what Bob is saying, because the moments where it just collapsed on the left side, or where you tell they couldn't run to the left side, it's a liability. And I was really hoping in the offseason that I was just going to be able to shrug it off, and that whenever we hit the ground in Atlanta, but Dan Moore, he hurts the running game. And the only reason we won that game was because Justin Fields started. I believe if Russell Wilson starts that game, we don't win that game. I believe Russell Wilson would have tried to force things and would have gotten sacked a lot. So Dan Moore has to thank Justin Fields that we won that game, and then stay out of week 2.
The rubber's going to hit the road when Fautanu is completely healthy. Because if they throw Fautanu out there at right tackle over Broderick and they sit Broderick down, that's when I really think that behind closed doors, Omar Khan, Andy Weidel, they're going to be inside the coaching staff meetings saying, what do you think you are doing?
Right.
We're not re-signing this guy, right? We traded up to get the other guy, right? So whatever you think you're doing, stop.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen going forward. And somebody, people undersell, because the bad guy for the Steelers up until Art took over was Dan Rooney. And he would, all during the dynasty, all during the 80s, all during the 90s, all the way up until the point where he let Art take control of the team. The general manager didn't have to be the bad guy. The coach didn't have to be the bad guy. He would call Noel on the carpet. He'd call Cowher on the carpet and say, hey, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. And you don't like it? It's my team. It never got public until way after the fact. But, there were times where it came to a head where it was going to be, you don't want to do it my way? No problem. I'll get rid of you. I don't care how long you've been here. You can go. And Mike Tomlin has never had that. He's never had that. Kevin
Yeah.
Colbert didn't have the stones to do it. Art Rooney wasn't going to do it because they make a.
But don't you think some of that is a difference in the like era of football? Like that was so much more common back in the early days up through like the 70s and 80s. You know what I mean? With that like heavy duty ownership being involved in that manner. And then it seemed like starting in the 90s, they started to back off more and turn more over to the general manager. So we saw that guys like Jerry Jones were kind of in the minority for being like the micromanagers of their teams. You know what I mean? So don't you think some of that is just kind of a sign of how the NFL has changed?
No, because what you got to remember about Dan Rooney is he wasn't the owner in the 70s. His dad was.
Right.
But he was instrumental. It was Dan Rooney. It was Bill Nunn. It was Chuck Noll who built the team. But Rooney, when he actually took over, even though they never called it general manager until they made the title finally for Colbert, Rooney filled that role for 30 years. I mean, in the late 80s, when he went to war with Noll and was going to fire him after the 88 season, at that point he was running the team, but he had cut his teeth coming up through, and I think this is where Tomlin has gotten away with it because Art didn't. He came up on the business side. Dan Rooney came up on the player side.
Yes.
Dan Rooney famously told his dad when he was, a teenager, you shouldn't cut Johnny Unitas. He's the best quarterback in camp, because he spent the whole time catching passes from Unitas during trade to keep him warm during training camp. So yeah, I think we missed Dan Rooney, and we've missed Dan Rooney for a very long time. And you've kind of seen this before he kind of took over in the late 60s as the de facto general manager. The chief was kind of okay with, we're good enough, whatever. Okay, we didn't make the playoffs. Yeah, we kind of want to make the playoffs, but bottom line is, are we going to make money?
Right.
When Dan passed, you kind of have seen over the last decade that slide back, that laissez-faire. And this is why, I really hope Art gives it over to the next Dan Rooney, and that he is the fiery side. Now, Dan Rooney, he's come up a little bit through the player side. He played football. He's been more on the business side with the international, but I really, really hope that when he turns it over, that we'll have that weapon. This is why I think Omar Khan is so important to the franchise future. I think they put him in place to be the check.
Yeah.
They don't want him to start it. Not hey, let's come in and fight. But I think he's there because he's got the force of personality to finally say, okay, Mike.
I don't want to go too far off track with this, but because I think this could be like a whole nother show. So you believe that Dan Moore is playing simply because Mike Tomlin is forcing the issue for some reason? Is that what you're saying?
Two things. I think Pat Meyer is incompetent and should have been fired.
Yeah.
And that Mike Tomlin, who's lost control of the draft process, in my opinion, is holding on to Dan Moore as the look what I can do. Look at my guy. He's the worst graded tackle in football for his career. I don't care that you think you're clever playing that. It's the same problem I have with Matt Canada. I'm clever. Look how smart I am. The reality is he's not that good. He doesn't belong on the field. If you're saying a first-round draft pick can't beat out the worst tackle in football,
it is literally what they said it can't. Do you know what I mean? 2 years in a row that they didn't beat him out in training camp. So, whether that means that you've done something wrong in developing this young tackle or what, I don't know. But, they're literally saying exactly that they didn't beat him out. And we only saw Broderick Jones come in last year because Chooks ran off at the mouth and got himself benched.
Yeah, and bottom line is, we haven't seen Broderick. The only game we saw Broderick play left tackle against the Ravens.
Yeah.
Go back and watch that performance and pick the best Dan Moore performance.
Yeah.
Broderick was clearly better at left tackle.
I agree.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive because the Dan Moore thing, everyone says the same thing. It's like, well, why is he starting? Well, he started so many games in the NFL. But it's kind of like saying a guy built a house and every time he builds it, it catches on fire. Well, why is he building houses? He's built them for 50 years, but they always catch on fire. Yeah, but he's built houses for 50 years. Like, it doesn't make sense. And that the last thing I'll say about this is I've noticed that as Tomlin is in the second half of his career, lost the investment he's made in the first half for me to just trust that what he says is going to work out on the field, because it's happened less and less. In the first half, Mike Tomlin has a certain way I didn't understand. It didn't always make sense, but it worked. Now, the Dan Moore thing does not make sense to me. There are things that Matt Canada didn't make sense to me. Things aren't making sense, and they're not working. And so, to me, I have to question that. So I'm hoping the Khan thing is for that reason, Bo.
Yeah. Okay, guys, so this weekend we're flying out to Denver, to the Mile High City, to play the always, for some reason, difficult Denver Broncos. On Cam Hayward's podcast this morning, he mentioned that he has never beaten the Broncos at home. So I looked it up. In the years that Cam has been in the league, they've played the Broncos 5 times, twice in Denver, 3 times at home. The 2 times in Denver, they lost both of those games. So Cam said, this is a team you just can't ever underestimate, the altitude, everything that goes into playing out there, as well as, just not underestimating the team in general. So he's very excited for the matchup. He feels like this is a game he wants to win so he can check a box off on his career scorecards of things that I want to make sure I do before I retire, because the odds are he probably won't get out to Denver again after this. So we are looking at probably Justin Fields being our starting quarterback. The way everything sounds right now, it's not confirmed, but it certainly doesn't look good for Russ to play and have his big revenge game that I don't even know who's getting revenge on who in this game, but it doesn't look like he's even going to have that. So what matchups are you guys looking forward to this weekend?
I think that where we got to start off with is TJ versus the McGinty tackle, because TJ was so dominant against Atlanta. He might actually be more dominant in this game. And I know, I think, Leanne, didn't the Denver, one of the Denver broadcasters bring it up that, hey, we're really scared about what might happen with TJ Watt?
Yeah, the same guy that did the Believe show said that he remarked that every film he watches of TJ, he said, most teams move their edge around to be up against their strongest, the strongest opponent on the line on the other side, but they never move TJ, and nobody ever seems to really adjust for TJ, so he said Denver's going to go out there and put him against McGinty, and he just doesn't see that as a good matchup, not favorable to the Broncos. He thinks TJ's going to be able to capitalize on that all day. TJ certainly looked like this looked like he had a tremendous offseason. Maybe some of the best football he's ever played. To be able to watch him precisely time that snap count where they called the false start on him that was later said to not be a false start. That's pretty impressive. That's one of the hardest things to do. JJ was talking about it on the Pat McAfee show, and he said that that's just the kind of stuff that it just takes so much film study, so much study and watch and practice. And it just, there's no way to naturally just do that. And TJ's one of the best at it. He said he works on it all the time.
It's like back when we had Jerome Bettis. The teams knew what we were going to do. You knew we were going to run Jerome Bettis, and we still did it. The Falcons knew what we were going to do. They knew what the coach said. They were going to shut TJ down. They weren't going to let him wreck the game. Afterwards, the offensive line said they had a great plan. They just couldn't execute it. Everyone always has a plan for TJ.
Yeah.
And TJ is not Myles Garrett, because the plans don't work against TJ.
Yeah.
So in this game, he's going to dominate again. I'm already going to say he's going to have a better game than he had in Atlanta.
What did they call him, Zach? The Jason Bourne of the NFL?
Arthur Smith. Yeah. Arthur Smith said that they're Jason Bourne.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to point out, because there's always this narrative, and the Denver guy kind of bought into it with teams I don't know why they don't adjust for TJ Watt. He always lines up in the same position. It's kind of that pro football focused narrative of he's always facing the worst. Myles Garrett moving around is always facing the worst pass rusher. teams know where TJ Watt is. And I really love that Greg Olson during the broadcast, who's an outstanding analyst, probably should be the lead at Fox over Tom Brady. God, was that awful. But he pointed out that if you go back and watch TJ's now nearly 100 sacks in the NFL, most of them he's double teamed, sometimes triple teamed. And we saw that when he made a huge play in Tennessee a couple of years ago. But there's always that most Myles Garrett narratives. Oh, Myles gets double teamed. Myles gets double teamed. Well, TJ gets double teamed. He just beats him.
Yes, I agree. And to be fair, what he was saying was not that they moved TJ around to be across from the worst lineman, but that other teams don't necessarily move their worst lineman away from TJ. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
You know where TJ is going to be, and they leave their guys there. My point was very similar to yours, which is that it doesn't matter where TJ is. He'll be that guy and the other guy too, and wreck them all. Real quick, I know we're kind of in the middle of talking about this, but this aligns with coming up the game this weekend. Brooke Pryor just tweeted out the Steelers practice report notables, and Patrick Queen was DNP with a groin, so that's a little concerning. Russell Wilson with his calf was limited. Dan Moore with his ankle was a full participant. Roman Wilson with his ankle was a full participant. Patrick Queen is an interesting and concerning addition to that list. He didn't have what appeared to be a huge game. He even commented that the defense was so good that it felt boring. I thought that was hysterical. He missed 2 tackles, but I mean, he had a solid game there in the middle of the field.
Yeah, I think the best thing you could say about a middle linebacker most of the time, or an inside linebacker, is if you don't notice them, they're doing a good job.
Exactly.
Yeah. And weirdly enough, I know it's Patrick Queen, but we're early in this season, and I like what I saw from our defense. Not just normally, I like what I saw from one guy, the cohesion and the way they got better throughout the game and the communication. And you didn't see guys running around like chickens with their heads cut off. So I'm going to trust Terrell Austin. I'm going to trust this defense. I'm going to trust the depth of our linebackers right now to say that we went into this offseason saying we know what happened last year with our linebackers. What can we do to make sure that we don't, not just guys in the middle, but guys all over, that we can switch in and move around? And I think they have the versatility on the roster that with Patrick Queen, hopefully he doesn't, but if he does have to sit the game out or be on a pitch count or whatever, it's not going to be as noticeable as it was going to be last year. So it doesn't. I thought it was going to worry me but I'm actually okay with that.
Like
I hope it plays.
Like, who has the voodoo doll for our middle linebackers? Like, what the hell? Why is somebody always injured?
I think it's much more likely, or at least I hope it's much more likely, that this is just a precautionary thing. Groins are funny, so if you tweak a groin, him practicing on a Thursday versus sitting out. And it's not like the Russell Wilson thing. It ain't going to be, oh, Patrick Queen couldn't practice on Friday, so he can't play. No, man, with a groin, okay, we know who you are. You're an all-pro level linebacker. You're good to go. Yeah, go ahead and get out there.
And I know that for the Steelers, it's the Thursday and practices are important. So it's not just what looks like today. Tomorrow will be the one where I know everyone's seeing. So I think if he doesn't practice again tomorrow, then I'll start to wonder a little bit. But yet again, it's not going to be a concerned wonder. I'm just going to be curious on what we're going to see, because I'm kind of excited to see what Peyton Wilson can do if he's in that. I'm curious to see what we got there. So
if it has to happen, I'd rather now than in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads us into, what we were going to talk about with, the defense in general versus Bo Nix. And, Chris Hoke again today was talking about that. It's not so much that Nix is something to be feared as a passer, but he was slippery in the Seattle game where he got out of the pocket a couple times and ran. And we've got to, he's not Lamar Jackson. He's not going to rush for 100 yards, or at least he better not rush for 100 yards if we intend to win the game. But that is a matchup we need to watch. And Zach, I know you were talking about maybe that's a role before we heard the news about Queen that Peyton Wilson could fill.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this plays right into what I was saying, because this is all the bad things right now in the regular season have this nice silver lining. So if Patrick Queen doesn't play, I was saying that the best thing that I could do in this game for Bo Nix is to tell Peyton Wilson, that's your guy. You're the spy. Watch him. And Peyton Wilson will relish that. And Peyton Wilson's faster than Bo Nix. Like you're saying, Bo Nix is not Lamar Jackson. He's Liam used a word that I'm going to probably think of with Bo Nix for the rest of the time. He is squirrely. I like that because the Steelers can deal with shifty quarterbacks. Squirrely quarterbacks are a different thing because they're unpredictable. And that defenses in Pittsburgh have traditionally had difficulty with. Tim Tebow was a squirrely guy. He was not a weird kind of runner thing. And Denver. So there's a lot of things about this game that have me excited and not too concerned. But the defense has to rule this game because this could be a trap game for us. This is an early test to see if we play down.
Yeah, definitely don't want to see us underestimate Denver in general or the Broncos or Bo Nix. You know, I'm a Bama fan, and so we played Bo Nix quite a bit when he was at Auburn. And you're right, we always called him kind of squirrely because he was unpredictable. He took the nickname Bo Picks because he tended to throw a lot of interceptions, so that was always kind of a fun name. But when he went to Oregon, transferred to Oregon, he got much better. Like, he really grew as a player there, settled down a lot, and became a much more steady and solid quarterback. But I still do think, like Bob said, he has a chance to be a little bit slippery. He can run, you know, he can errantly, he'll throw some pass that looks fantastic and then turn around and throw an interception the next time. So he can be a little hard to predict that way. So I think it's, you know, and there's also not going to be a ton of tape on him in the Broncos system because he's a rookie and this is only game 2. So I think that, you know, the Steelers just have to be careful. You brought it up for the show, Zach, about, you know, this is our first test of making sure we don't fall into a trap game. And I think that that's really appropriate here. You know, we were the underdogs going into Atlanta. Do you know what I mean? And so regardless of what anybody says about the point spread for Denver, which I don't even know what it is, I think that
it's 3. We're favored by 3.
My favorite by 3. I thought we were favored, but I wasn't sure the points. So, you know, regardless of what that is, I still think that we have a tendency to underestimate teams like this that we should beat because they look so bad against Seattle last week.
And Seattle did a good job when they were pressuring him. Yes, when he slipped away, it hurt him a little bit. Ultimately, still won the game. But I watched both of his interceptions. He was on the run. He was in the move, but he couldn't take off because there were guys there. It was, hey, I forced out to the right. He kind of threw back across his body on one. And another one, I thought it was hilarious. The announcer, I forget who was doing the game, but he rolled out to the right. And then it looks like he had a lane to run. And then as he's uncorking the pass, you could hear the analyst go, "Oh no, oh no," and then he threw it, and there were 3 Seattle defenders who were fighting to undercut the ball and to get in front. And this is where I do think, from a matchup standpoint, this really favors us.
Yes,
Denver's receiving core they're slow. I mean, Marvin Mims is pretty good, but he's not. He should be their number 1, but he's not. Cortland Sutton is a good matchup for Joey Porter because he's not going to run by him. There'll be some physicality there.
Yeah.
Sutton is a very good combat catch guy, but I like the idea of there's not going to be a ton of separation between the Denver wide receivers and our secondary, even with Beanie Bishop out there. So I think they have the opportunity, if they stay disciplined, and this will be a good test for the rest of the season, stay disciplined in your rush lanes, force him into mistakes, and it could really go well on Sunday.
Yeah. Speaking of Seattle, go ahead.
Well, really, yes, really quick. Seattle gave a great blueprint for how to beat Bo Nix. Bo Nix threw the ball 42 times and was still the leading rusher for the Denver Broncos. And he only had 100 and some. So he threw the ball a lot. Didn't have a high rate of completion, didn't pass the ball for a lot of yards, was sacked twice, threw 2 picks. So our pressure is better than Denver, than Seattle. Our defense is better than Seattle. And we are our newcomers. We already had 2 picks by our newcomers, so that's exciting about the turnovers. Our defense could have a huge game. So Terrell Austin was, I think, as far as efficient play callers in the league for week 1, he was among like the top 2 or 3 defensive play callers. I think Warren Sharp Football put that out. He was incredibly efficient. The Steelers were only, I think, one of 2 or 3 teams in the NFL that had positive play calling on both sides of the football as far as efficiency goes. So we did very well in Atlanta. So I'm really hoping it's not a trap game.
Yeah.
Speaking of positive play calling, what are we going to talk about next?
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of contested catches, what do you guys think about the matchup between Pickens and Patrick Surtain?
I mean, it's box office. It's the matchup that we, are all going to want to tune into. And the real question, I mean, Pickens and Surtain will be entertaining because they're going to target Pickens the most. It'll be interesting to see what Arthur Smith does here. As far as, hey, I know Pickens is my guy who's going to get the most targets, but I'm going against probably the top 2 or 3 corner in the NFL. What am I going to do a little bit differently? Where's my wrinkle going to be? Does that mean that we'll see the continued burst to the tight ends until he gets Pickens one-on-one? It's going to be interesting. I can't wait to see Pickens versus Surtain, because Surtain, it will play tight man coverage, but I hate to say it to Surtain. Hey, look, you might have George Pickens on your hip, but when the ball goes up, you're at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
It ain't going to work.
This sets up a great test on so many different levels for the Steelers, because there is a chance that great job against Pickens, but that opens up the rest of the team. If that happens, for me, the test is, does Pickens be okay with the fact that we may have won the game and he had to be a little bit of a decoy to take away Surtain the whole game if he's not used? Will that maturity be there? I'm not expecting it. I think Pickens will beat out Surtain, but he's a top 3 corner in the league. And this is also going to show the difference between Matt Canada and Arthur Smith. Again, we will see a wrinkle. We need to see somebody else from the wide receiving core step up this week. Pat Freiermuth, I think, is going to be targeted a lot, but if Roman Wilson is ready to go, and it sounds like he had a full practice, if he does again tomorrow, then that could be really good. We need someone other than George Pickens, who is a receiver, on this team to step up. No other receiver not named George Pickens was targeted more than 2 times against the Falcons. So that I don't think that can happen again with a guy like Surtain covering him.
Well, Denver secondary is the strength of their team. So bottom line is Pickens got a third of the targets last week in Atlanta. Let's just face it. I mean, they don't have anybody else to throw the ball to. So it's either gonna be Pickens and the tight ends. I mean, there's no magic formula that's going to all of a sudden make Van Jefferson, Fields look in his direction 5 or 6 times. Because I think if we get into a spot where we're throwing the ball 30, 35 times, where a guy like Van Jefferson could factor in, I think that's a bad spot for Justin Fields. I think it's going to be a lot like last week. It'll be controlled third of the field throws. I got Pickens high. I got Freiermuth or Washington or Pruitt low, or Jaylen Warren, who I hope will play some more. He's the only other guy who got more than 2 targets besides Pat and was it Jefferson or Austin who got the 2 targets at receiver?
It was Austin. I don't remember Jefferson being targeted.
And I think that it was 1 or 0.
Right, and there was a couple times where you knew, like, they screened to Najee, or they tried to throw it in the flat to Najee. The one time he dropped it, the one time he caught it, and I think Smith kind of got uncomfortable with, okay, I don't know that I want to run that if he's only going to catch half the balls thrown to him. And if Warren's not on a pitch count, I think we'll see a lot more of him in the passing game. It'll be Warren low and Pickens high, or it'll be Warren low and Freiermuth high. And that's why, and please spare us in social media. Okay, I don't care if they throw in the middle of the field. If it's a rollout, I either go, I hit my low guy, I hit my high guy. I'm okay with that offense, because that's an effective offense for Justin Fields.
Let's be very, very clear here. When Matt Canada did not use the middle of the field, he did not care. He didn't give a reason. Arthur Smith didn't use the middle of the field. He said, oh, by the way, here's exactly why I didn't. It was a plan. It was difference. So
I was
continue.
going
I
to say
had to
Matt
get that.
Canada didn't know what the hell he was doing. Do you know what I mean? There's a big difference there. Obviously, to me, it felt like what Smith did was very purposeful and calculated in a
Yeah.
good way. Do you know what I mean? That gradual like loosening of the leash on Justin Fields is, the game getting a little bit better. I hope that I do. One thing I really like about Fields playing again this weekend is the ability to see, if he lets him off a little bit more, gives him a little more lead, and sees what he can do and what some of the guys can do. I don't care if we never use the middle of the field, as long as we're running an effective offense that is getting points and whatever way we need to get points to win. I don't care if it's always 8 field goals. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'd like it to not be that, but we just have to win the game. All that matters is the win. And I think a good offensive coordinator sets their ego aside and does what you have to do to work with the players you have to get them there. This isn't about being up there. And I think that's part of what happened to Matt Canada in the beginning was I think he had this wild, so innovative offense, that he runs in this plan, and he was going to come out there and do it. And then it didn't work with Ben Roethlisberger because Ben's like, I do whatever I want. So sorry, no. So then Matt Canada was like, screw it. I just won't do anything. Do you know what I mean? And the whole thing kind of fell apart. It can't be. And then, Pickett came and couldn't do it. So it can't be about your ego. It's got to be about the players you have. I mean, frankly, that's part of what happened with Russell Wilson in Denver. I think he didn't fit into whatever it was Sean Payton wanted him to be, whether that was personally in the play, all of it, attitude, whatever it was. I think that, it's part of what went wrong there. So,
I mean, Sean Payton wants a quarterback who can make pre-snap reads. That is not Russell Wilson's game.
right.
It's never been Russell Wilson's game. It's why when he went there, it was a bad match to start with because he was expecting Russell Wilson to play like Drew Brees. And that's one of the things he liked about Bo Nix, although we didn't really see much of it last week, is Brees would get the ball and go. It was not I sit there and hold it and I run around and I'm looking for down the field. You look at the heyday with Michael Thomas. I mean, those were 8-9 yards to the sticks. Boom, I hit you. If you happen to break it, great. Brees was a master at that. So it was a bad match to begin with. It wasn't so much personality they didn't like him. He couldn't play the position the way he wanted him.
He didn't pick him. He didn't want him. He didn't pick him. Do you know what I mean? And I think he just, it was going to be no matter what, it was going to be sour grapes for Sean Payton because it was not what he wanted. So I don't know that there was much Russell Wilson could have done that would have necessarily made him happy. I think he was determined to get himself a new quarterback and start over with this offense. And, he didn't pick Russell Wilson. He was the guy that was left over from the old coach. And so, it was kind of just willing to get rid of him.
But you got to look at Wilson had a better year with Payton than he did with Hackett the year before. He was terrible. The organization wanted Wilson gone, not so much Payton. He didn't want him either, but it was.
I don't think Payton wanted him. I think it was more Payton than anything, but it doesn't matter. What else, guys? What else are you thinking about this Broncos game? Are there things that you're concerned about? I'd really like to see the Steelers minimize some of the penalties. I know that there was a lot of those penalties last week that were like BS penalties that were outside of our control 100%. But, we have to control what we can control, and keep the game clean so that we don't draw unnecessary attention to ourselves. So I'm hoping to see that look a little bit better this week.
Should be easier to run the ball. I mean, Seattle, once they got on track and started running Kenneth Walker, he went over 100 yards. He had an abdomen injury towards the end, but Charbonnet was effective for them as well. So I want to see the running game get going. Then again, I mean, I'll just be honest. If it's Najee 20 times because Jalen's on a pitch count, I don't know how much more effective they will be unless they start running in between the guards, not those pitch outs to the tackle.
Yeah. Naj took home his first his first Angry Awards nomination already for his performance against the Falcons last week, which was awesome. I thought he had a really good game for everything that Najee Harris can control. You know what I mean? Other things being outside of his control, the guards, the tackles, whatever. He can't control that. But for the things that he could control, I felt like he had a really solid game, looking like he's trying to prove something.
I do. What I like is the Cortland Sutton. He seems to be a little distracted because he's supposed to be focusing on his matchup with Joey Porter. Apparently, he wants to put hands on TJ Watt. So I welcome that. all day long
Yeah.
because that is the funniest thing I have ever. I've heard like offensive linemen call TJ. Does Sutton know how big he is?
Right.
I welcome that all day. If Sutton's focus is legitimately, I need to help out with TJ, then that means he's not going to be thinking about what he's supposed to be thinking. I welcome that. If TJ is already mentally wrecking the game,
I'll tell you,
because that stood out to me. That's a weird thing for a wide receiver to say.
yeah, a little message for Cortland Sutton. You want a piece of TJ Watt? Catch him when he's dropping and run a shallow cross in front of him. Watch what happens.
I think there's been a lot of big talking for leading into this game, which I think is hysterical for two teams that aren't really like serious rivals in any way, but all the chirping back and forth between Pickens and Surtain, they're both, George Pickens is like, they better come right. And Surtain's like, I don't care who it is. So I think that they're going to be very chippy out there with each other too. I think that'll be, like you said earlier, an interesting matchup to watch, but I love all the big egos. You got Joey Porter running his mouth, and you got, Cortland Sutton running his mouth. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out on the field.
Sweet.
Yeah. And hopefully Corliss Waitman wearing Kenny Pickett's jersey number 8. I hope that it brings you good luck and, the Tommy Maddox good luck, not the Kenny Pickett luck or something, and that you punt beautifully every punt of the game because we really need you.
All right.
If you made it this long, guys, we really appreciate you joining us, listening to the show. Do we want to do some predictions before we go? I just realized.
Absolutely, we want to do some predictions.
Let's do some predictions. I'm going to say 20-16 Steelers. We're going to spit in the box this week.
I'll say 24-13.
I like it.
I'm gonna go in the middle of that. I'm gonna say the offense is gonna score 23. Last week I said 20. We got 18, so I'm gonna say 23. Three more Boz field goals. I do think we're gonna have a couple touchdowns. One of them might be on defense. And I'd say 23-10. I really don't think. I mean, unless Bo Nix escapes, I could maybe see him scoring 2 touchdowns. But I see maybe a touchdown, maybe a field goal. We always have that one lull in the game where we let him go down the field. So yeah. For me, 23-10. Yeah.
See who is closest when we do our live post-game show.
I was 3 points away from a perfect prediction.
You've been good a lot. You've been close a bunch. I remember last season. Yeah, you've been close.
I think it's been 5 straight seasons I've had one perfect prediction at some point in the year. So I want to keep that streak going.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right, guys. Like I said, if you've made it this far, we really appreciate you watching. Please take a second to like, share, and subscribe the podcast. You can join us on TikTok for our daily TikToks. You can find us on all social media platforms, both personally and the show. We would love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts. Hit us up. Talk to us about what you're thinking about for the game. What are you excited to see? What are you worried about? We'll be back Monday evening to do our live post-game reaction show. And here we go, Steelers.